Snow drifted in slow, heavy sheets over Pine Hollow National Forest, the kind that didn't just fall, but settled, pressing into every branch, every footprint, every sound. The storm had swallowed the trail hours ago, turning the forest into a white floor with no edges and no clues. Nothing moved, nothing dared to. Except Rex. The German shepherd stopped so abruptly that Emily Carter nearly bumped into him. His body stiffened, muscles tightening beneath his coat. He lowered his head, pressing one ear against the snow, as if the frozen ground were whispering something only he could hear. Emily shivered and pulled her scarf higher. She was 9, brave in the way children are brave when they don't fully understand danger. Her father had always told her that Rex was the kind of dog who never did anything without a reason. But right now, staring at him frozen in place, she wasn't so sure. Rex lifted his head, scanned the silent trees, then lowered his ear again. Same motion, same precision. Emily watched him repeat it a third time. Listen. Dig. Stop. Listen again. It wasn't random. It wasn't playful. There was too much intent in his eyes, too much force in the way he pushed his paw into the snow before suddenly stopping as if waiting for a reply. A sharp gust cut across the clearing. Emily's breath fogged in front of her, thin and trembling. She rubbed her hands together through her gloves, watching Rex with growing unease. They had walked this trail dozens of times before, but today felt different. The air sat heavier. The quiet was too quiet. Even the wind held its breath around them. Rex moved again. He stepped forward 2 paces, stopped, and pressed his ear down hard against the snow. Emily frowned. Rex was a police dog, trained to track, search, protect. But she had never seen him do this. It wasn't the stance he used for finding a scent, and it wasn't the posture he took when danger was nearby. This almost looked like he was waiting for something beneath the snow to move. Emily forced a laugh, though it sounded thin and fragile. Rex, come on. You're acting weird. He didn't look up. A flicker of worry crawled up her spine. She glanced back toward the tree line. Her father wasn't anywhere near. No hikers, no distant voices, no footprints except theirs, and even those were fading fast under the storm. Rex shifted suddenly. He dug twice, fast and violent, then stopped abruptly. His body trembled with tension. Emily stepped closer, heart thudding. What is it, Rex? What do you hear? A sound cracked somewhere far off. Emily jerked her head up, but the forest remained still, blanketed in the kind of silence that made every instinct push inward. She waited for Rex to bark or growl or even look at her. But he didn't. He kept staring at one exact spot in the snow, eyes dark, breathing uneven. Then Emily noticed something she hadn't seen before. The snow where Rex had pressed his ear wasn't perfectly smooth. There was the faintest dip in the surface, like the ground had shifted beneath it at some point. A dent no bigger than a handprint. Easy to miss. Too easy. Emily crouched beside him. Rex didn't react, didn't acknowledge her presence. His focus was absolute. The forest felt like it was shrinking around them. Emily swallowed. Rex, what are you listening to? Right then. The dog's ears snapped upward, rigid as stone. A low vibration trembled through his frame. Not fear. Recognition. Emily's breath caught. She didn't hear anything. Nothing at all. But Rex did. Something was under there. Something alive. Her pulse spiked as she looked around, suddenly aware that the storm wasn't the only thing closing in on them. Pine Hollow had always been quiet in winter, but never like this. There was an edge to the silence now, something sharp beneath it, something waiting to be found or avoided. Rex placed his paw on the snow and pressed gently, almost respectfully, before leaning down once more. Ear to the ground. Listening, not searching. listening. Emily's stomach tightened. She didn't know what was happening, but she felt it too, the wrongness curling under her ribs. Something dangerous, something urgent, something buried. Rex had been trained for many things, and she knew that. But nothing had ever made him act like this, like the snow itself was speaking to him. The wind picked up again, swirling powder around their feet, erasing the small dip in the snow as if trying to hide it all over again. Emily whispered, barely able to hear her own voice. "Rex, what's down there?" Rex didn't move. He just listened. Rex had been trained to search for many things, but this time he wasn't searching. He was listening. Emily Carter hadn't meant to wander far. That morning had started like every other snow day in Silver Creek. Slow, quiet, the kind of silence that made the house feel too big and too empty. Her father was working another long shift at the station, and the walls seemed to echo without him there. So she bundled up, clipped Rex's leash, and stepped outside just to breathe air that didn't smell like reheated soup. She only intended to walk to the tree line, just far enough for Rex to stretch his legs, just long enough to break the stillness. But Rex had other plans. He pulled the instant they reached the first row of pines, muscles tightening beneath the leash, as though something deep in the forest had already called his name. Emily planted her boots, leaning back with all her weight. "Rex, slow down. We're not supposed to go far." The dog barely acknowledged her. He tugged again, harder this time, and Emily stumbled forward. Powdery snow billowed around them as she caught her balance. She stared at Rex in disbelief. "Hey, seriously?" Dad said no, going deep. He paused just long enough to glance back at her. It wasn't defiance in his eyes. It wasn't excitement either. It looked urgent, focused in a way that scared her more than it reassured her. Still, he kept moving. Emily bit her lip, torn between fear and the sharp pinch of curiosity. Rex wasn't a dog who misbehaved. He didn't chase squirrels or run after shadows. He didn't wander unless he had a purpose. But today, this strange, storm-choked morning, he seemed pulled by something she couldn't see. She followed, whispering to herself that she would turn around any second. Just a little farther, and she'd drag him home, no matter how stubborn he got. Her father's warning echoed in her mind. "Stay near the trees. Don't go deep. Not in weather like this." But each time she tried to slow down, Rex pulled again, guiding her deeper into the white. By the time she realized how far she'd gone, the storm had already swallowed her footprints. Emily's breath formed small clouds as she looked around, suddenly uncertain. The familiar landmarks were gone, replaced by endless white and the dark silhouettes of trees. For a moment she thought about turning back immediately. She imagined her father's face when he found out she'd gone this far. The disappointment, the fear. Rex shoved his nose into the snow, huffed, and began digging with sudden intensity. Emily froze. The dog tore through the snow like he was trying to reach the center of the earth, paws slicing into the frozen crust with frantic precision. Snow flew in wide arcs, landing on Emily's coat and catching on her eyelashes. "Rex, stop. What are you doing?" She grabbed his harness, but he didn't stop. He didn't even seem to feel her touch. It was like watching someone in a trance, completely consumed by a mission only they understood. Maybe he's confused. Maybe he's just overwhelmed by the storm. She wanted to believe that, needed to believe it. Anything else meant something was wrong, and she didn't want wrong. Not in this forest, not today. But the look in Rex's eyes didn't match confusion. There was too much certainty, too much instinct in the way he pressed his head close to the snow after every burst of digging. Emily hugged herself against a shiver that wasn't from the cold. She didn't want to fear her own dog, but something about this moment made her feel small, made the woods feel bigger. Back in town, the world was moving on without knowing any of this. Inside the Silver Creek Police Department, the heating vents rattled against the storm. Phones rang, radios crackled with unfinished transmissions, and a tired dispatcher tapped at her keyboard, logging routine weather calls and stalled vehicles. A small red icon blinked quietly on the main monitor. Officer Daniel Harper. No signal. Officer Lisa Moreno. No signal. The dispatcher frowned at the frozen GPS marker, tapped the screen once, then again. Nothing changed. No movement. No update. But the weather was vicious today. The forest always messed with the signal. A sergeant walked by, glanced at the display, and shrugged. Probably just another search delayed by weather. Storm like this, radios die every 10 minutes. They'll check in. He didn't sound worried. No one did. The storm was inconvenient, not dangerous. Officers Harper and Moreno were experienced. They knew Pine Hollow better than half the hikers who bragged about it all summer. Someone brought coffee into the room. Someone joked about a plow truck getting stuck. Someone changed the channel on the radio. Life continued. No urgency, no alarm, no understanding that two officers were already buried in the same white silence, swallowing the world around them. Emily knelt beside Rex, brushing snow from her sleeves as she watched him tear through the ground with an intensity she'd never seen. This wasn't just digging. This wasn't just instinct. And even though Emily couldn't explain it, couldn't name it, couldn't prove it, something inside her whispered that she shouldn't stop him. Because while everyone else thought today was just another search, Rex clearly didn't. He wasn't confused. He wasn't lost. Only one of them understood that something was horribly wrong, and it wasn't the human. The temperature dropped so quickly it felt like the forest exhaled ice. Emily pulled her hood tighter, but the wind pushed through the fabric anyway, slicing across her cheeks and numbing her jaw. She hadn't realized how deep they'd gone until every direction looked the same. White sky, white ground, dark trees leaning inward like silent witnesses. Rex didn't seem to feel any of it. He jerked forward again, paws slashing into the snow with a ferocity that made Emily stumble backward. His barks came short and sharp, the kind that vibrated in his chest, but died quickly in the air as the storm swallowed the sound. "Rex, stop! Rex, what's wrong?" He didn't even look at her. This wasn't normal. Rex didn't bark like this. He didn't lose control. He didn't act without command. Her father always said Rex had discipline carved into his bones, but right now he looked like something had snapped loose inside him. Another bark. Harder, urgent. Then Rex threw his entire body sideways, shielding a specific patch of snow with his torso. He crouched low, head tilted to the ground, ears rigid, nose trembling as he inhaled something Emily couldn't see, couldn't smell, couldn't understand. Emily felt her stomach twist. She'd grown up around police dogs. She knew their moods. She knew when they were warning, when they were tracking, when they were just restless. This wasn't any of those. This was panic. Emily took a step back. "Let's go home, Rex, please. Dad's going to kill me if he finds out we came this far." Rex ignored her completely. He lunged forward and began digging with a violence she'd only ever seen in dogs taken off leash during search training videos her father showed her. Snow erupted around him, flinging in thick sprays that hit Emily's face. She wiped her eyes with her sleeve, heart pounding harder with each frantic scrape of Rex's paws. Then she heard it. Barely. Faint. A dull pulse beneath the earth. Emily froze. Her breath caught in her throat as she cocked her head, leaning in. For a moment she thought it was the wind shifting through branches, or maybe the groan of ice cracking. But then it came again, a muffled vibration so soft she almost doubted herself. Rex stopped digging. He pressed his ear to the ground. Emily didn't breathe. The world narrowed to one quiet point beneath the snow where something waited. A sound rose and fell, too deliberate to be nature. Emily's heartbeat thundered in her ears. She shook her head, trying to reason with herself. No, 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 there's nothing down there. There can't be. It's just the storm, just noise, just my imagination. But Rex let out a sharp, guttural bark. Not warning, not fear, recognition. He dug again, tearing through frozen layers with frantic claws. Snow flew against Emily's boots, covering them completely. She took a trembling step toward him. Rex, what did you find? He didn't respond, didn't pause, didn't give her even a glance. His body moved with a clarity she didn't understand, as if he were following a map drawn beneath the ice. Another faint sound rose closer now, like a knock swallowed by snow. Emily's chest tightened so hard it almost hurt. She looked back the way they came, but the storm had erased everything. She was alone out here, alone except for Rex, who seemed convinced the ground itself was calling him. She should go home. She should run. She should find her father. Every instinct she had screamed to turn back, get out, leave whatever this was buried where it belonged. But Rex didn't stop. Emily watched him collapse halfway into the deepening hole, his tail sweeping snow as he fought to reach something she couldn't see. His breathing grew ragged, his movements more desperate. He threw a glance over his shoulder, not at her, but through her, as if silently pleading with the world to help him. The ground trembled again under Emily's knees. This time the sound was unmistakable. Someone was under there. Her fingers tingled, her throat tightened. The forest blurred for a moment as fear and disbelief crashed into her all at once. This wasn't a game. This wasn't Rex acting weird. Someone needed him, needed her. Emily's breath shuddered out of her. She dropped to her knees beside Rex, snow soaking through her pants instantly. Her hands shook as she clawed at the frozen surface. Okay, I'll help you, just don't stop. No one told her what this moment meant. No one explained what she was choosing. She didn't understand it herself. Not yet. But she dug. Beside her, Rex pressed forward with renewed force, his shoulder brushing hers, their movements sinking without a single word exchanged. Snow gave way in chunks beneath their hands and paws, collapsing into a narrow pocket of air where warmth shouldn't exist and sound shouldn't survive. Emily didn't know what they would uncover. She couldn't imagine it yet. She only knew one thing for certain. This wasn't a dog acting strange. This wasn't a trail gone wrong. This wasn't curiosity or instinct or confusion. Something was buried beneath them. And whatever it was, Rex refused to walk away. Snow gathered in Rex's fur as he dug. Every movement slower now, heavier, driven by something deeper than instinct. His paws punched into the frozen crust, scraped, lifted, then plunged again. The storm swallowed each sound almost instantly, yet he kept going, desperate, methodical, refusing to stop even as exhaustion trembled through his muscles. Emily knelt beside him, her breaths short and uneven. She tried to dig too, but her hands shook, slipping on the icy surface. The forest around them felt frozen in place, as if Pine Hollow itself were holding its breath. No birds, no echo, no sound except the dull thud of Rex's paws striking snow. It was a strange kind of quiet, the kind that didn't belong to nature, but to something waiting underneath it. Rex lowered his head again, pressing his ear into the hole they'd carved. Emily watched him, barely able to blink, her heart pounding loud in her own ears. She couldn't hear anything beneath them, just wind and her own fear. But Rex lay still, listening with the kind of focus that didn't come from curiosity. It came from memory. Far from the storm, far from the cold, another version of Rex lived in a different time. He had once stood in a desert compound half a world away, boots crunching on gravel around him, soldiers shouting instructions over blasts of heat and dust, Training exercises, controlled chaos. He had learned to search for signs of life buried under rubble after simulated explosions, learned to freeze at the faintest vibration, learned that a heartbeat could hide beneath soil, steel, or silence. One afternoon during training, a young officer knelt beside him, offering a hand Rex didn't need but accepted anyway. Officer Daniel Harper had laughed softly, brushing sand from Rex's ears. "Dogs hear what we ignore. That's why you matter." Rex didn't understand the words, but he recognized the tone. Trust, expectation, purpose. Now, in the present, he pressed against the snow as if listening for Daniel's voice again, as if something familiar lived beneath the ice. Emily watched him close his eyes, lean closer, and inhale a breath that shook through his whole frame. It was the posture of a dog who knew exactly what he was listening for: a fragile pulse, a trapped breath, a life hiding behind silence. The forest felt impossibly still, as though nature itself were pushing against them, burying whatever truth waited below. The trees loomed tall and dark, their branches bending under the weight of storm-laden snow, forming a canopy that blocked out what little light remained. Even the wind softened, falling into a shallow hush as if to avoid interrupting whatever Rex was trying to hear. Emily rubbed her hands together, barely aware of the cold anymore. Her gaze stayed fixed on Rex. He wasn't frantic now, not wild. His digging had shifted into something else, almost calculated. He scraped the ground in short bursts, then went still again, repeating the pattern with unwavering determination. Listen. Dig. Stop. Listen again. With each cycle, Emily felt a strange pressure building in her chest, a sense that she was witnessing something important, something she should understand, even though she didn't. She swallowed hard and whispered into the silence. "Rex, what are you hearing?" He didn't look up, didn't break focus. His body tensed, and Emily saw his breath fog the air in short, sharp bursts. He pressed his ear down a little harder, paws bracing in the snow. The storm muted everything except the sound of their breathing. Emily glanced around, desperate for something normal, something familiar. But the forest gave nothing back, just white, just cold, just emptiness. It was as if the world above was pretending nothing existed below. Rex dug again, this time slower, more careful. Emily leaned forward, her heart ready to leap at the slightest shift. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was on the edge of something she couldn't name. Not danger exactly. Not yet. But something close to it. Something waiting. In her mind, a thought appeared uninvited. Someone could be down there. She pushed it away. Too impossible. Too frightening. Too much for her to hold. But the image stayed. A buried space. A trapped voice. A faint knock like the one she thought she'd imagined earlier. She stared at the hole Rex had carved, at the way he trembled every time he paused to listen. Snowflakes clung to his whiskers. His paws were raw at the edges. But he didn't stop. Didn't hesitate. Didn't doubt. Humans believed in weather reports and GPS signals and radio checks. Humans trusted protocol and reason. But dogs trusted something else, the memory of breath, the vibration of life, the instincts people had long forgotten how to hear. Emily swallowed. "Rex, you're scaring me!" His only answer was to dig again, more fiercely this time. Somewhere deep below, the snow shifted with a soft, unnatural thump. Emily's eyes widened. She froze. Rex lifted his head, ears forward, tail stiff. His breath hitched. Something was down there. The forest stayed silent, but not peacefully so. It was the silence of held truth, buried and waiting, hidden not by accident, but by design. Emily felt her pulse in her throat. This wasn't a dog acting strange. This wasn't a wrong turn. This wasn't just a search gone long. Rex had heard what the world above had ignored. and the snow was finally starting to give up its secret. Rex's paw struck something that wasn't snow. Emily jerked upright. The sound had been small, almost dull, but unmistakably different from the rhythm of ice breaking. Rex froze. His whole body went rigid, ears pinned forward, nose hovering just above the ground as if afraid to exhale. Emily crawled closer, her gloves trembling against the snow. She brushed aside a loose clump, expecting another layer of packed ice. It wasn't ice. A shape emerged, pale, rigid, human, a hand. Emily gasped and stumbled backward, landing hard in the snow. Her breath caught in her throat as she stared at the fingers half buried, stiff with cold, skin fading into the same color as the storm around them. For a second she couldn't move, couldn't think. The world narrowed to a single terrible realization. Someone was here, someone real, someone who shouldn't be under the ground. Rex snapped out of his trance with a sharp bark, the sound cutting the air like a blade. He shoved his nose deeper into the exposed snow, brushing away flakes until more of the arm appeared. A dark, uniform sleeve, frost-bitten fabric stiffened by ice. Emily crawled forward on instinct, her breath shaking violently. She reached out, hesitating, then brushed frozen snow from the surface of the sleeve. The material crunched under her fingertips. Then she saw the face, partially buried, pale, eyes closed, lips blue beneath a strip of tape pressed tightly over the mouth. Emily slapped a hand over her own mouth, choking down a scream. No, this can't be real. Her heart pounded so loudly it drowned out the storm. She looked wildly around the clearing as though someone might appear to tell her she wasn't seeing what she was seeing. But the forest gave her nothing. No voices. No help. Just cold and endless white. Rex barked again, but this time not at the body she'd found. He had moved. When Emily whipped her head around, she saw him pressing himself against another mound of snow a few feet away. Paws spread wide, torso draped protectively across something still hidden beneath the surface. His breath fogged the air in desperate bursts as he curled his body around the unseen shape, trying to shield it. Another jacket, another human form. Smaller than the first, completely still. Rex wasn't digging now. He was lying on top of this one, the heat of his body pressed against the chest of the second buried officer, as though he'd made a choice, to give warmth he didn't have, to share life with someone who was losing theirs. Emily stared at him, stunned. Rex had no coat thick enough to survive long out here. He was already shivering. His paws were raw. But he refused to move. Rex. Oh no. Rex. He looked at her, eyes dark with something she'd never seen before. Not fear, not confusion, but determination. A plea. A command. A message she didn't want to understand but suddenly did. Emily knelt, snow soaking through her pants. She brushed more snow away from the first officer's face. He didn't respond. She pressed her shaking fingers near his nose. A faint puff of warmth met her fingertips. He was alive. Barely. She turned to the second officer beneath Rex. She reached out, brushing lightly against the man's shoulder beneath Rex's weight. She felt nothing at first. Then, after a long, agonizing second, the chest moved beneath Rex's fur. Shallow, uneven, but alive. Emily's breath cracked out of her. Both of them. Alive. Buried. Suffocating. She looked at Rex again. The dog huddled over the second officer, refusing to move even when the wind whipped hard enough to sting. He knew they were still alive. He knew what would happen if he left. He knew, and he stayed. Emily's eyes filled with tears. Her father had once told her that dogs didn't make choices the way people did. That instinct guided almost everything they did. But Rex wasn't following instinct now. He had made a choice. The harder one. And Emily suddenly realized she had to make one, too. Her breath hitched as she looked toward the distant tree line, where the trail should have been, where home should have been. The storm had erased everything. She didn't know which direction was safe. She didn't know if she could even make it back alone. She didn't know if she would freeze before she reached help. Staying meant risking her own life. Leaving meant risking theirs. Her chest tightened until it hurt. Tears stung her eyes, blurring the bodies in front of her. She hugged her gloves to her face as if pressing the fear back in. I don't know what to do. The wind blew harder, scattering loose snow across the half-dug hole. The storm was swallowing the officers all over again. Emily looked at Rex one more time. He trembled violently, paws dug into the snow, his body forming a shield around the dying man beneath him. He didn't whine, didn't bark now, just held his ground, waiting for her to decide. Her voice cracked. Rex, if I leave, you'll be alone with them. The dog didn't move. Emily wiped her face with the back of her glove. Her heart felt too big for her chest, pounding with a decision she didn't want to make but couldn't avoid. Leaving would have been easier. The dog chose harder. Emily stood, knees shaking, fear clawing at her throat. She turned toward the storm, and she ran. Emily ran until her lungs burned, until the cold carved through her coat and into her bones, until she couldn't feel her fingers or her feet. The storm shoved against her with every step, blowing sideways sheets of snow that blurred the world into white and shadow. The forest no longer looked like a place she knew. It looked endless, hungry, ready to swallow anyone who slowed down. She didn't slow down. Branches scratched at her arms as she pushed through, slipping on hidden ice, catching herself on shaking knees, then forcing her legs to move again. Every few seconds her mind screamed to turn back, terrified that Rex might be calling for her, terrified that the officers might stop breathing before she reached help. But another voice pushed against the fear, quiet, thin, but steady. Keep going. Don't stop now. They're alive. The ranger station's roof appeared through the wall of white almost by accident, a dark outline she nearly missed. Emily stumbled the last stretch, waving her arms wildly. Help! Please! Somebody help! The door flew open. A ranger rushed out into the storm, grabbing her before she collapsed. She could barely speak, barely breathe, but the words tumbled out in broken bursts. 2 officers, in the snow. Rex, digging, alive, please. The ranger didn't ask questions. He didn't tell her she must have imagined it, not when he saw the terror in her eyes. He scooped her up, carried her inside, and radioed for emergency response with a voice that didn't shake, but tightened with urgency. Within minutes, the small station exploded into motion. Maps slammed onto tables, coordinates flashed on screens, radios crackled with overlapping voices. Deputies rushed through the door, pulling on boots and heavy weather gear. A medic grabbed oxygen tanks and thermal blankets. Another ranger printed the last known GPS signals from officers Daniel Harper and Lisa Moreno. When the locations matched Emily's frantic description, the entire room fell still for half a second. Then everything accelerated. Go. Now. Move. Snowmobiles roared to life outside, engines screaming through the storm as responders tore into the forest with flashing lights, swallowed quickly by white. Inside the station, Emily sat wrapped in 2 blankets, Rex's leash still clenched in her hand even though he was miles away. She rocked herself in the chair, whispering to no one, "Please be alive. Please wait. Rex, don't leave them." A deputy knelt beside her. "You did the right thing, Emily. You found them in time." But Emily shook her head. She hadn't found anything. Rex had. Rex had listened. Rex had refused to leave. She only followed. Back in the storm, the rescue team reached the clearing, and everything happened at once. Rex barked as soon as headlights cut through the dark, a single sharp cry that echoed with relief and exhaustion. He pushed himself up from where he'd been lying across Officer Lisa Moreno, his fur crusted in frost, his legs trembling. He wouldn't leave her, not even when help finally arrived. Rescuers dropped beside the first exposed officer, Daniel Harper. His pulse was weak, his skin cold. But he breathed when an oxygen mask covered his mouth. The medic's shoulders sagged. He's still with us. A second team moved to Lisa. She didn't respond at first. She didn't move. Her pulse was nearly impossible to find. Rex pressed his body against hers again, as if reminding her he hadn't given up. When Lisa finally gasped, a small, fragile sound, the medic exhaled a shaky breath. "We've got her. She's fighting." They worked fast, wrapping the officers, starting warm IV fluids, stabilizing their breathing. Rex collapsed beside them, his job not done, but his strength nearly gone. The convoy raced back to town, sirens muffled by the storm. Silver Creek's hospital lights glowed like a promise through the snow. And that was where the truth began to unravel. Not in the forest, not in the storm, but in a warm hallway where investigators gathered around Daniel Harper's recovered body camera and an evidence bag containing items found near the burial site. A ranger handed the camera to the lead investigator. It was damaged, but salvageable. The first recovered audio was faint, distorted by snow and static, but enough to hear Daniel's voice speaking urgently to his partner. "We shouldn't be seeing this out here. This stash. This isn't just hunters hiding gear. Someone didn't want this found." A pause, a crunch of footsteps. Then another voice. "Lisa's. If this is connected to last month's case, we need backup, now." But backup never came. The recovered evidence hidden under a carefully constructed mound of snow and brush near the site told a clearer story. Stolen goods, illegal trafficking ledgers, weapons linked to an active investigation. The kind of evidence that could dismantle a criminal operation. And the kind of evidence someone would do anything to bury. Investigators pieced together the sequence slowly, carefully. Daniel and Lisa stumbled on a stash hidden deep in the forest. They were ambushed before radioing details. Their GPS units were smashed. Their mouths were taped. Their bodies dragged and buried where the storm would erase every trace. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't miscommunication. It wasn't a routine search gone wrong. It was retaliation. It was meant to silence them. It was meant to disappear under the storm. But storms didn't bury truth. Not completely. The truth wasn't treasure or mystery or revelation. It was the cost of doing the right thing. Daniel Harper and Lisa Moreno weren't victims of bad luck. They were officers who stepped into the wrong clearing and refused to ignore what they saw. Emily, wrapped in blankets, listening from the hallway, felt her chest tighten. She didn't understand all the details, criminal networks, evidence, motive. But she understood one thing with absolute clarity. They were buried because they tried to do the right thing. She wiped her face with her sleeve, whispering to herself. They didn't deserve this? No one does. Down the hall, Rex lay with his head resting on his paws, eyes half open, exhausted but alert. A nurse gently stroked his back. "You saved them, buddy." Rex closed his eyes. Not because he understood praise, but because somewhere inside him he had already known the truth long before the humans did. He had heard what they ignored. He had held on when others couldn't. He had stayed because leaving was never an option. And now, slowly, painfully, the truth was surfacing. Not the kind found in reports or evidence bags, but a truth simpler, harder, and far more human. Doing the right thing comes with a cost, and sometimes the only ones willing to pay it are the ones who can't speak at all. The hospital corridor was dim, the kind of dim that didn't feel dramatic but simply honest. Night shift lights hummed overhead, washing everything in a soft, tired glow. No one spoke loudly. No one rushed, It wasn't that the crisis had ended. It was that everyone now understood how close they had come to losing more than they could bear. Inside Lisa Moreno's room, monitors blinked in steady rhythms, the only proof that her body was still fighting its way back. Just an hour earlier, those rhythms had vanished. A flat line, a sudden absence, a breath stolen without warning. Doctors had flooded the room, voices low and focused, hands moving with the precision of people who had seen this before and knew not to panic. Emily had watched from the hallway, frozen as the crash cart was pushed in. She didn't see everything, but she saw enough. The way a nurse gripped the rail of Lisa's bed a little too tightly. The way a doctor whispered instructions with a calm that didn't quite match the urgency in his eyes. There was no dramatic shout when Lisa's heart restarted. No triumphant exhale. No hugging or cheering. Just a thin green line reappearing on the monitor, slow and faint but steady. A nurse simply nodded once. A doctor murmured good and reset the wires. Then the room settled again into its quiet rhythm. Emily pressed her hands to her face and cried silently, shaking with relief she didn't know how to hold. Rex leaned his head against her knee, warm and steady, grounding her in a moment she didn't yet have the words for. Across town, justice took shape in a different kind of silence. The arrests happened without fanfare, carried out in the early hours before sunrise. Detectives moved with calm precision, guided by the evidence Daniel and Lisa had discovered, even as it nearly cost them their lives. A warehouse was raided. A cabin near the service road was searched. Men who had believed the storm would bury their crime woke to the sound of handcuffs instead. There were no dramatic chases, no shouting, no threats. Just quiet steps on icy pavement. Just the soft click of metal closing around wrists. Just the calm voices of officers doing the job two of their own had nearly died for. The news didn't break immediately. There were no headlines screaming victory or tragedy. Silver Creek was a small town. Word moved one person at a time, a whispered update in the diner, a murmured conversation in the grocery store aisle, a nod exchanged between neighbors who suddenly understood why the forest had felt so heavy that day. In the hospital, Daniel Harper rested with his eyes half open, watching snow fall outside his window. He didn't smile when a detective told him the suspects were in custody. He didn't ask for details. He simply nodded once, letting out a breath that sounded like something loosening inside his chest. "Good," he whispered. "That's good." It wasn't anger. It wasn't triumph, just relief. Emily visited his room that afternoon. She stood in the doorway, unsure how to step inside. Daniel noticed immediately. "Hey, kid," he said softly. "Come here." She did, slowly, awkwardly. She held Rex's harness as she walked, as if unsure whether she belonged in the room at all. Daniel reached out, touching Rex's head gently, feeling the warmth beneath his palm. "You two saved us," he said. Emily shook her head. Her voice came out quiet. "Rex saved you. I just helped a little." Daniel studied her, tired eyes warming. Sometimes helping a little is everything. Rex curled beside Emily's feet, exhaling a long breath as though he'd been holding it since the moment the snow began to fall. There was no celebration, no gathering in the hallway, no cameras. Just a small girl, a recovering officer, and a dog who had refused to leave when the world above had moved on. Later that evening, a nurse paused outside Lisa's room. She watched the rise and fall of Lisa's chest, the steady pattern of her breathing. She reached up and gently adjusted the blanket around her shoulders before whispering into the stillness. "You're safe now. Rest." Justice hadn't arrived with sirens. It hadn't shouted or demanded attention. It had come quietly, through persistence, through truth, through people doing what needed to be done. No one was punished publicly, but something was finally right. Spring didn't arrive in Pine Hollow all at once. It came quietly, the way healing often does, not in sudden bursts, but in slow, deliberate moments. Snow melted in soft, shrinking patches. The wind no longer carried the sharp sting of winter, but a gentler breath that moved through the trees like a reminder that nothing stays frozen forever. Emily Carter walked along the familiar trail with Rex trotting beside her, though neither of them moved with the urgency of that winter morning. Today their steps were measured, unhurried, peaceful. Rex looked older now, in ways most people wouldn't notice. His fur had grown thicker around his neck, a slight graying near the muzzle. His movements were still strong, but there was a softness to him that hadn't been there before. A quiet confidence, a steadiness earned rather than trained. Emily noticed everything. She noticed how he paused whenever the wind shifted, how he listened to the forest the same way someone listens to a story they've heard 100 times but still respect. She noticed how he no longer pulled forward, but stayed close enough for their steps to fall in rhythm. She noticed, too, that she did not fear the woods anymore. A few months had changed her in ways she didn't quite understand. She had grown more still inside, more certain, more aware of how fragile things could be, and how strong she had been forced to become. Her father said it was rare for a child to carry a memory like that and come out balanced on the other side. But Emily didn't think she had carried it alone. Rex had been there, always. They reached the clearing where the snow had once buried so much. Now it was covered in early spring grass, uneven and patchy, but alive. The sunlight hit it in soft streaks, lighting the ground where 2 officers had nearly disappeared from the world. Emily exhaled slowly. "You think about them too, don't you?" she whispered. Rex didn't answer, but he lifted his head toward the open space, ears tilting slightly as if listening to a silence he recognized. He had a new vest now, a lighter one, a different color, no longer marked for patrol or active duty. Instead, a small patch read simply, "Therapy Support K-9 Division." It had been official a few weeks earlier, a ceremony small and quiet, held at the station with only a handful of officers present. Daniel Harper had been there, standing tall despite his injuries, a hand resting over the place on his chest where Rex's warmth had once kept him breathing. Lisa Moreno had been wheeled in, healing but determined not to miss it. They had both insisted on being the ones to clip the new tag onto Rex's harness. "You didn't just save us," Daniel had said. "You held us here long enough for others to get to us. Some things, no amount of training teaches." Emily had stood behind Rex, her hand lightly resting on his back. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Now Rex's days were spent in rooms filled with quiet people who carried heavy memories, veterans who woke in the night from echoes of war, children who sat in corners with their arms wrapped around themselves, unsure how to speak about what they'd lost, families who visited the community center carrying grief like a second skin. Rex met each one of them with the same steady focus he once showed in the snow, that grounding presence that told them, without words, that they weren't alone. Emily sometimes joined him after school, watching from the doorway as tough-looking men softened at the feel of his head beneath their hand, or as frightened children leaned against him, letting their small bodies relax for the first time in weeks. He had been trained for search. He had been trained for detection, but healing seemed to be the work he was born for. Emily sat down in the clearing, leaning back on her hands as she looked at the sky, shifting between blue and soft clouds. Rex lay beside her, stretching out until their shoulders touched. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked gently. "The work you did before." Rex flicked an ear. Then, after a moment, he rested his head on her lap, eyes half closing in contentment. Emily stroked the line of fur along his neck, smiling. I think this suits you better. A light breeze moved through Pine Hollow, carrying the scent of damp earth and pine needles. Birds called from somewhere deeper in the trees. The clearing was warm now, honest. No sharp fear, no buried secrets. Just two lives still intertwined by a moment that could have ended everything, but instead had pulled them into a different kind of future. Emily leaned her cheek against the top of Rex's head. I'm glad you stayed that day, she whispered. Rex didn't move, but the slow, steady rise of his breath felt like an answer all its own. The storm was gone, the wounds had softened, and in the quiet of spring, Pine Hollow felt like a place where things could grow again. By summer, the story no longer belonged only to Emily, Rex, Daniel, and Lisa. It belonged to Pine Hollow. It belonged to Silver Creek. It belonged to anyone who had ever wondered whether courage still existed in quiet places, or whether small voices could carry far enough to matter. It began the way most local legends do, as a whisper passed between people who needed it. First, it spread through Silver Creek Elementary, where Emily's classmates crowded around her at recess, asking questions she never quite knew how to answer. Teachers spoke softly about bravery in ways that made her cheeks warm. In the library, someone taped a simple handwritten sign above the bulletin board. Ask about the girl who listened. Ask about the dog who didn't walk away. Rex became a familiar visitor in the school's counseling room. Children who struggled with fear, grief, or sleepless nights found comfort in the weight of his head on their lap. He listened the way he listened in the snow, deeply, without interruption, without judgment. Storytime changed too. Books about heroes and rescues gave way to something more personal. When the district decided to open the school year with a community assembly about courage, they didn't invite a motivational speaker. They invited Daniel Harper, not Officer Harper, not a hero, just a man who had lived to see, a tomorrow he almost didn't get. He stood on the stage with a cane he barely used anymore, wearing a simple button-down shirt instead of his uniform. The auditorium was filled with students, teachers, and parents. More than he'd expected. Emily sat in the front row next to Rex, her hands fidgeting in her lap. Daniel cleared his throat gently. I'm not here to talk about what happened to me, he said. I'm here to talk about what saved me. The room quieted until even the air seemed to listen. Courage doesn't always look like running into danger. Sometimes it's a 9-year-old who doesn't turn back because something tells her not to. Sometimes it's a dog who decides to stay with you, even when staying costs him everything. He glanced at Rex then, his expression softening in a way that made the crowd lean forward almost instinctively. I was unconscious for most of what happened in that forest. But I know one thing. I woke up alive because someone chose the harder thing, not the easier one. He didn't elaborate. He didn't dramatize. He didn't speak like a survivor trying to inspire. He spoke like someone still learning to breathe without the weight of snow on his chest. And somehow, that made everyone listen just a little harder. A week later, the story resurfaced again, in a place where silence usually hung heavy. At the Veterans Outreach Center, a retired Marine began telling it to a room of men who rarely shared their own stories. He spoke of the dog who refused to abandon 2 dying officers. He spoke of a little girl who ran into a storm instead of away from it. And slowly the men nodded, recognizing pieces of themselves in that kind of loyalty. One veteran said softly, "Sometimes the ones who save us aren't the ones we expect." Rex visited often. He would sit beside chairs where old hands trembled, lean into legs that weren't steady anymore, and lift the corners of mouths that had forgotten how to smile. He didn't know what legacy meant, but he lived it every day, in small, steady gestures that stitched people back together. Even the Silver Creek Police Department changed because of what happened. New procedures were written for wilderness patrol. A training module was created focused on reading environmental signs and trusting canine alerts. Officers spoke about Daniel and Lisa not with tragedy but with quiet gratitude. It wasn't the kind of story departments liked to spotlight, but it taught something protocol couldn't. Sometimes a dog knows what your training doesn't. Sometimes instinct outruns technology. Months after the rescue, the town held a simple community gathering at the Pine Hollow Pavilion. There were no banners or speeches prepared. People just showed up. Families, hikers, firefighters, teachers, rangers. Word had spread that Daniel agreed to say a few words. He stood there again, this time without a cane, without hesitation. Lisa sat in the front row, wrapped in a light jacket despite the summer heat, her recovery still ongoing but strong. Daniel breathed in slowly before speaking. "I shouldn't be here," he began. "And I don't say that for sympathy. I say it because someone else should be standing where I am." The crowd shifted, unsure. The person who should be speaking isn't an officer. He isn't someone trained for danger. He's a dog who listened when the rest of us couldn't hear anything at all. Laughter rippled through the pavilion, not loud, but warm. Rex lifted his head, tail wagging once, the way he did when he recognized his name, even in a tone he didn't fully understand. Daniel continued. "And a little girl, someone your kids sit next to in school, ran alone into a blizzard because she believed two strangers should get a second chance at life." He paused. Legacy isn't about medals or promotions or recognition. It's about the people who live differently because of what they witnessed. I'm trying to live differently now. I hope all of us are. Emily felt her father's hand squeeze her shoulder. She blinked up at Daniel, unsure whether she was supposed to feel proud or overwhelmed. Maybe both. People didn't clap at the end. Not loudly. Not the way they did after a victory or performance. They clapped gently, with something almost reverent in the sound, the kind of applause given not to a hero, but to truth. Rex rested beside Emily, basking in the faint evening light, as if he understood he had become part of something the town would remember for years. A local legend, not the type carved in stone, not the type taught through grand stories, but the kind carried in the quiet spaces of a community, in classrooms, in outreach centers, in police briefings. A reminder that some lives change not because someone did something extraordinary, but because someone refused to ignore what others overlooked. Daniel stepped down from the pavilion stage and walked toward Emily and Rex. He knelt, scratching Rex behind the ear. "Thank you," he murmured, again. Rex blinked slowly, calm and content. In Pine Hollow, the forest still stood tall. The trails still wound through shadows and sunlight. But the town walked a little differently now, more aware, more grateful, more connected by a moment when courage came from places no one expected. And the story continued to travel, carried from voice to voice, not because it was dramatic, but because it had become a part of who they were. The evening light slanted low across Pine Hollow, turning the tree line into a soft silhouette against the fading sky. Spring had already loosened winter's grip, but the air still carried a quiet chill, the kind that made Emily Carter pull her jacket a little tighter as she stood at the familiar edge of the forest. Rex stood beside her, older now in a way only people who knew him well would notice. His coat still thick, his stance still steady. But a softness had settled into his movements. He didn't lean forward with the same fierce urgency he once had. Tonight he simply stood with her, breathing slowly, watching the path where everything had changed. Emily looked down at him with a small smile. "We made it back here," she whispered. Rex lifted his head, brushing it lightly against her hand, as if acknowledging a truth they both understood without needing to speak. The forest was no longer a place she feared or avoided. It was something else now, a memory, a scar, a lesson. Beyond the first line of trees lay the clearing, quiet again, unmarked, showing no sign of the day 2 officers had almost been lost beneath the snow. Time had a way of covering things up, but not everything. Emily breathed in, slow and steady. "Dad always said the woods keep their secrets," she murmured. "Maybe some secrets deserve to stay." But what happened here? I don't want to forget it. Rex's ears twitched gently, picking up sounds she couldn't hear. The distant crunch of branches, the rustle of wind threading through new leaves. For a moment, it felt like he was listening again the same way he had that day, when the world had been buried in white, and he refused to ignore the faint signs of life no one else could sense. "Some lives aren't saved by grand actions," she said softly, but by the refusal to walk away. Rex leaned in, pressing his weight into her in that grounding, wordless way he always had. She closed her eyes, letting the memory settle, of fear, of cold, of choices far too big for someone her age. And yet she had made them, because Rex had made his first. Behind them, a few cars rolled along the road, evening commuters heading home. Somewhere in town, Daniel Harper was preparing for a new shift. Lisa Moreno was finishing physiotherapy. People who should have been stories carved into headstones instead woke each morning with another chance. All because a dog insisted on listening. Emily rose slowly, brushing dirt from her knees. "Ready to go home, Rex?" Rex didn't bark. He simply turned toward the road and walked beside her, his pace steady, his presence warm. Just as he had always done. Just as he would always do. Before stepping off the forest's edge, Emily looked back one last time. The woods were peaceful now, quiet in a way that didn't feel haunting. She felt gratitude more than anything, for a moment that shaped her, for a dog who taught her what loyalty meant, and for a truth most people never learned until it was too late. Somewhere inside the trees, a breeze passed through the branches, gentle, almost like breath. Emily smiled. Many people who hear stories like this say it reminds them of someone they once trusted completely. Who does it remind you of?